Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the informational meeting of the City Council. It is May 4th, 2021. Welcome to those watching online, on TV, and those here in person. First up, we have our committee and before we begin, I do want to point out that our live broadcast and recording is going to include closed captioning through item 4A, which includes our ADA transition plan. So with that, we will now move on to committee and commission reports. Metro Management Council, Council members Erickson and Kiley.
Yeah, and I will do that. We had our meeting this past Wednesday, and we finalized the budget for Metro Management. Much of that was made easier due to a grant that our Metro Management team secured in the amount of $1,040,000. $630,000 of that will be used to fund 4 badly needed positions for the next 2 years. So actually we're playing catch up, where it's not like we're getting 4 additional, we're just trying to play catch up. We're always behind the 8 ball when it comes to staffing our Metro 911 operators. But so that'll be a big assist. And then the remainder of that grant money then will go to help equip the new PSAP. Well, that'll be part of the public safety training facility in the next couple of years. So some of that will help pay for the councils, as well as the radio positions that are required from our staff too. So I'm happy to say that it passed unanimously. It was 3-0. We did have 2 members that were absent.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments regarding the report? Seeing none, let's move on to council remarks. Council remarks for today. Yeah, please, Councilor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess one of the things that I wanted to at least mention is that there is a council position open on the Multicultural Center Board. I'm planning on filling out the application, but if anyone else is interested, I'd be glad to do it. But I think one of the things that we keep talking about is getting these boards filled and represented, and they can't meet if they don't have a quorum. So I'll make sure that I'm at least filling that out. And if anybody else is interested in serving on that board, please take my spot. But I'm interested as well. So yes.
Councilor Erickson.
Just as a follow-up to that, thank you. I kind of blanked out and remembering to discuss this. I talked to Director Pritchett the other day, and as you'll see on the agenda tonight, we're talking about the parking advisory board, and through that process, we've mentioned seeing some areas that need oversight and improvement. How can we as a council assist in making sure those boards are full? What is the process when a person applies for them? And so upon talking to Director Pritchett, they are going to take a look at all of the boards, kind of give us the policy and how they fill those boards, as well as their meeting requirements, what's required in resolution versus ordinance, and making sure that our website is all up to date as well, because it's clearly kind of all over the board at this point. Just making sure too that those committees and boards make sense and that they are adding value and not just taking up staff time and the people's time, so to speak. And so I don't know if they'll have new boards or join boards or whatever that looks like, but that's something that as I talked to him, I said I was interested in, and he graciously offered to go ahead and work with staff to making sure that Julie's got what she needs, the mayor's assistant, and all of that. So hopefully in the next few months, we'll see some major changes coming through for all of our committees, just making sure that we're abiding by the rules that have been set forward and so forth. So stay tuned to that. If you have questions, you can reach out to Director Pritchett. I don't know. I don't think he's doing it all himself because these boards are all over the administration. So they will be reviewed and updated.
Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. I just want to announce that this Memorial Day, the 31st of this month, the ribbon cutting will take place on our first ever State Veterans Cemetery, and that is slated for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The first burial will actually take place later that week then. So they are taking applications. In fact, Deputy Secretary of Veterans, South Dakota Veterans Affairs, Aaron Pollard, and myself did a presentation for the Lennox American Legion on the cemetery. And I mean, people, there's a high interest among our local veterans to get applications in. It was, in fact, that was a very informative session for me as well, too, is regarding the process. But so if you have the opportunity to stop out on Memorial Day at 2 o'clock, where all of you played a major role in making that happen. So I would invite you to attend. They will be, parking's going to be somewhat limited. It's not like cemeteries have big parking lots. So they will be arranging shuttle buses using River City from, I believe, the Alliance to the cemetery. More information will be available on that as we get closer.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Just by complete coincidence, I drove out there this weekend and at least got to look at it from the outside since it was cordoned off and it really looks gorgeous. Could somebody remind me, maybe you know, there was talk potentially at the legislature of paving the rest of that road. Was that funded?
There was a $4 million original ask, and I think that was reduced to 1.5 million eventually, but they are still working on that. I'm hopeful that we can pave at least the southern portion of that township, what is a township road, from the Jim Zweet Memorial Road to the cemetery, and then maybe at some point it could be then paved the rest of the way to the north, for up to what we normally refer to as the Renner Road. So that's still in the works. But
Okay.
It'd be very helpful if we could get support for that.
Great. Okay. Good. I guess I do have one item. I'm working with the administration right now to set up, we were looking to maybe do an informational, but maybe we might have to do it on a separate day and do a working session in the next few weeks on the subject of medical cannabis. We have the July 1st date where that becomes effective looming, and we need to have a discussion to be educated on essentially the legal landscape and what that means for us as a community. And it's kind of tight right now with all of our informational presentations. We have some time-sensitive things, so what we may end up having to do is poll you and ask you if there's a time that works best for you, and we can just do it on a separate day or try to squish it in. I suspect it could raise, there could be quite a bit of discussion, so I don't want to put it in and have it something where we have to cut it off at 15 minutes or something. So if people are open to it in the next few weeks and could make time, we could set even a separate day and call it a working session. So, because there's plenty to be educated about. So look for reach out on that very shortly. So with that, we're going to move on to presentations. ADA Transition Plan, that's presented by our Assistant City Attorney, Charlotte Fennis. And also we have on video conference, Peter Blank, PhD, JD, and James G. Felikos, JD, both from the, looks like the Blank Group, LLC. Charla, welcome.
Thanks, Greg. So I've met most of you in different capacities, working on different projects, but recently was moved over to head up the Human Relations Office and also act as the city's ADA coordinator. So I'm here today, also brought along Lindsay Meyer, she's our new Human Relations Specialist. Wanted to introduce her to you all. She's doing a fantastic job for the city. And I'm excited to be here today to just talk a little bit about the 2021 updated ADA transition plan, which is part of my role as the city's ADA coordinator. So it's a 200-page document plus appendices. It's not available right now. We finished up last revisions actually last night. So it will be posted to the city's website, and also I believe Tom is going to attach it to the minutes so you all can take a look at it. Just going to give a really broad overview of it today. It's been a very collaborative process, and I'm really grateful to our contacts in the various city departments, their time and energy put into this to figure out what projects we have going on in all of the departments. Daniel Hager, my predecessor, put a lot of energy into this as well, so I'm grateful for all of that he did. And then, of course, Dr. Blank and Jim for all of their work as consultants on this. They've actually worked on this for the last decade in some capacity, doing some in-person meetings from 2011 to 15, and they had a draft report in 2015, and then over the last couple of years due to COVID, it's been phone calls and WebEx and that sort of thing, but working with us to really update the transition plan to make sure we're up to speed on where things stand as a city. I think Daniel gave you a background on this previously. You know, this is part of the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Title II addresses public entities, and as a city, we cannot discriminate against people based on their disabilities and the provisions of the city's programs and services. And so part of the requirement of the ADA is that we have updated transition plans that address where we're doing well and then where we're not doing so well and what our plan is to address that. So that's exactly what this plan does. What we've been working on doing is figuring out in each department, you know, how are we doing well and what do we need to improve on, what's our plan for that. There are some pieces that I, as the city's ADA coordinator, am directly involved in, training employees on our ADA accommodation process and discrimination, you know, non-discrimination policies, department-specific trainings for the police department, health department, that sort of thing. If a city employee has a disability, I work with them through the accommodation process to make any reasonable accommodations we need to make sure they can do their job. Lindsay helps me process complaints, public complaints against folks in the city if they're alleging discrimination, and we work through that and try to get a resolution for that. I am the liaison for the Disability Awareness and Accessibility Review Board, and so that they're involved in considering all of these accessibility issues. And then there are, of course, areas where I just am coordinating to make sure that the plan is being implemented. I mean, don't ask me how to make our website accessible. I don't do IT stuff, but I will follow up to make sure that the experts in that area do. You don't want me to touch our website. This is not a plan that the council needs to immediately take overall action on, but there are many pieces within it that ultimately down the road, we will need council action to get the funds for it, to make the decisions, to implement certain pieces of it. So once you've had a chance to take a look at it, please reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns, if any of your constituents have questions or concerns. We do want to make sure that the city is as accessible and friendly to everyone as possible. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our consultants, who I'll introduce briefly. Dr. Peter Blank is a university professor at Syracuse University. He's a chairman of the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. He's written on the Americans with Disabilities Act and related laws and received grants to study disability law and policy. He's chairman of the Global Universal Design Commission and president of Raising the Floor USA. Dr. Blank has received his Juris Doctorate from Stanford University, where he was president of the Stanford Law Review, and he received his PhD from Harvard University. Dr. Blank is a former member of the President's Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities. Prior to teaching, Dr. Blank practiced law at the Washington, D.C. firm of Covington and Burling, and he served as law clerk to the late Honorable Carl McGowan of the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. Jim Falakos is known for his 30 years advancing the civil rights of individuals with disabilities at the local, state, and national levels. He is the former Disability Rights Fellow for the American Civil Liberties Union, staff attorney and interim legal director of the ACLU of Eastern Missouri, and associate at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, LLP. He received his Juris Doctorate from Columbia University, where he was a Harlan Fiske Stone Scholar. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Blank.
Thank you, Charla, and I hope you can all hear me well. It really is a pleasure to be with you today. Am I coming in okay?
Sound great.
Thank you. Well, I've kind of grown up with Sioux Falls, starting as an Iowa Hawkeye. My 8 and 10-year-old boys went to the old arena to watch WWF, or whatever it was, wrestling, and today they're 30 and 32 years old. We've been working very collaboratively over the past decade or so with Sioux Falls, all aspects of the city. And by the way, I was encouraged, I think, that we might see the end of the pandemic in sight when I saw recently that Minerva's Salad Bar reopened, having spent many great meals at Minerva's and the Salad Bar. I believe it's reopened. Isn't that correct, Charlotte?
It is reopened. I think they've changed the format of it, but it's back.
Okay, well, we have that for the record, I guess, and it's accessible. As Charlotte said, more than a decade ago, I was asked to come into Sioux Falls because there was a dispute going on about the then new soccer fields and the accessibility of the soccer fields. And around that time, the mayor was very interested, of course, and the council in making the city as livable and accessible as possible to everybody, people with disabilities, their family members, friends. Of course, you have the huge medical complex with the Sanford Medical Complex. And as my friend Brian McLean said when I first came out here, it wasn't Minerva's, but he would say he uses a wheelchair. If I can't get into Minerva's, then they're not just losing my meal ticket, but they're losing the 5 people I'm bringing with me. So there is a very strong social and economic reason for making Sioux Falls as livable as possible. And to that end, about a little before 2015, we actually presented to the city councils, this may be before some of yours time, we went through from soup to nuts pretty much every aspect of city government and the ways in which the city touches its citizens. The then mayor said, I'd like to pull down the covers, these are his words, and really see how we can do the best job we can be doing so that we are an attractive destination and place to live, which is certainly the case. So over the last years, we've been working very collaboratively with the Parks Department and the transportation and hospitals and city parks and healthcare, libraries, Great Bear ski area, pretty much you name it. One of my first responsibilities, even before Jim started with us years ago, was actually when the Falls Park was being built or renovated at that time. And we paid a very close attention to the accessibility of that park as really an iconic place in the area. So after 2015, there was a little bit of a lull in our activities, which is normally the case. New administrations came in. And more recently, Daniel Hager, who has now moved on to a state's attorney position, I believe, and then Charla really took the lead in helping us finalize this, what's called self-evaluation or transition plan. And that plan is eventually overseen or looked at by the U.S. Department of Justice. And the idea is that cities will have a current way of dealing with accessibility challenges or barriers or opportunities. So we've spent the last couple of years, now, of course, virtually a lot of it with COVID going on, looking at the ways in which we can enhance within realistic bounds accessibility, which means allowing as many people with different disabilities as possible to access the great services of the city. And that included, we spent time looking at when the new arena was built. As a matter of fact, one of our first cases involving Sioux Falls years ago was handicapped seating in the then old arena. So it goes way back, but the thrust has always been to credit to you and the city and its leadership that Sioux Falls always wanted to do the right thing and be out in front on these issues, and that is very evident in what we are going to present to you today. I'm just giving an overview. Jim, my colleague, will give a little bit more detailed analysis of what we've found, and then we hope if you have questions or you have any discussion, we're delighted to do that. Short answer is the city has made incredible progress. We looked at all aspects of city operations, and while no one entity is perfect always on these sorts of things, it's the momentum and the culture and the will to make the city as livable as possible, which made our job a lot easier than other cities we have worked in, which have chosen the litigious route and spent money on lawyers. Jim and I are lawyers in litigation, rather than putting money into programs to help its citizens with disabilities. So I think I'll stop there. I would say that the city is very well positioned. We've completed our report and submitted it to Charla, and we will be working as needed with the city over the next year to work through any kinks that may arise, to help resolve any disputes, and also as new operations and activities come online to make sure they are as accessible as possible. For example, even today, having the closed captioning so that people who are hard of hearing and deaf can equally have access to this meeting. So thank you very much on behalf of myself and Jim. And Jim, I wondered if you would go through a little bit more specifics, highlighting our overarching themes, some details, and then Jim, please, or Charla, please take questions.
Sure. Thank you very much. And I also want to thank everyone in the city for all of the assistance and cooperation in putting this large effort together. In our recent review kind of update, we weren't able to visit, which was disappointing. But we did get input on a lot of meetings and calls with a broad section from city staff and various departments and members of the public. When we were there previously in 2011 to 15, we did meet with more people in the public and had more public forums, which helped inform the report then, and I'm relying on those prior comments and the more narrow ones we got last year. But when the report is put up on the website, I do hope the city can publicize it and figure out how to elicit further comments, let people take a look at it and get back to the city to add on to items that they might see. And for the council itself, I'm going to pay a little more attention on some things, as Charlotte indicated, that might come to the council later on to explain why they're important for accessibility, why it will be worth making those investments when the city determines which ones to focus on. I'll start with transportation. The buses, when we first started, were all accessible, but in our visits there, we learned that many of the bus stops were not, and over several years, the city made sure that all of the bus stops were accessible, and that they've continued to monitor those, which took investment from the city, a substantial investment of time and money, and so that was great to see. One of the big items for Sioux Falls, as for most cities, is the paratransit system. Paratransit works to transport people who, for one reason or another due to disability, primarily are not able to use the fixed route system because paratransit is transporting, only a few people on any given route. It is much less financially efficient than a large bus with 30 or 40 people on it on a fixed route. The city has made some changes to its system over the years. Since we have been there, one of the largest has been trying to find ways to decrease the number of, broadly speaking, agency trips, which were operations by certain rehabilitation facilities, communal living facilities for people with different disabilities, and allowing them to get to jobs or other things. And they've consolidated those to, I'm blanking on it now, but another provider which has separated it, hopefully reduced the costs. In order to continue to decrease cost in paratransit, other ways that the city can improve its fixed route are, important. So the more people who don't need to rely on paratransit, who can use the fixed route buses, would be time and money worth spent because of the efficiency of the fixed route systems. So, I hope the city continues to look for different ways to work on those. In the report, we make some suggestions for ways that it can. The sidewalks I'll talk more in depth about in the next section, but to the extent that sidewalk accessibility is an issue, that is a basis for people to need to use paratransit. So if a person has a mobility disability and the sidewalks in their neighborhood are not accessible, then they won't be able to get to the fixed route buses perhaps, and would then rely on the more expensive paratransit system. So that investment in sidewalk maintenance and improvement is important for saving money overall, more efficient system of transportation. The same goes for enforcement of similar to maintenance is in snow removal. Sioux Falls gets a lot of snow. If city sidewalks are not cleared, you have a distributed system of snow removal where local landowners are responsible for clearing their sidewalks. But in the end, the city itself is responsible, once it has chosen to provide sidewalks as a public service. The city is responsible to make sure that the sidewalks are kept in an accessible manner, and blockage by snow would block accessibility. So the city should continue and try to improve implementation of enforcement on those issues. Now, if I recall, the system in Sioux Falls had fines that if the property owners disputed them and were charged, that they may come in front of the city council, and so the council can, consider that and the balancing of equities between the city and the property owners, and determine whether that distributed system of enforcement is the best way to go ahead. We heard from riders and paratransit that they wanted better systems to improve communication between the paratransit and riders. in order to assist people with auditory and cognitive disabilities, we suggest investigating the feasibility of adding electronic signage on the current fixed route buses that would make it easier for people to not use paratransit, but to be able to use the fixed route buses with an indication of upcoming stops and where the bus is currently, since some people may not be able to understand the bus driver's auditory announcements over a speaker. And coming back to that change in paratransit, where the city has moved to a different paratransit provider for these agencies and other changes, the city needs to follow through and make sure that what are potentially negative effects on those users, reductions in paratransit, are not creating a situation where transportation is less equitable for people with disabilities, which has one other complaint that we heard relatedly. The city is expanding in areas, I understand, to the south of the city where there is not fixed route service. Where there is not fixed route service, there does not need to be paratransit. And some of the providers have found that because of the economics of the areas where the land value is lower, their rental leasing is cheaper there, that is where they're finding they need to place their facilities. And the city, will need to consider how it's going to serve those areas so as not to, create transportation deserts in ways. On the sidewalks and public rights of way, so in 2018, in response to a citizen's complaint, there was an agreement and a plan adopted by the city to address public rights of way and improve sidewalk maintenance for all people in the city. We believe compliance with that and speeding it up are of utmost importance. The timing of it is on the long side, but that worked apparently for the DOT and Highway Administration. But it is a many years long time frame that the city is working on. So ways that it can come to a method to speed that up would be all for the better. In addition, and relatedly, in our interviews with public works staff, they were less than confident that they would, with current staffing, be able to maintain compliance with the sidewalk plan agreement. So the public works staff did a large review in preparation for the 2018 plan, where they went out and investigated the conditions in the sidewalks for cracks or areas where curb ramps were not compliant or non-existent, that type of thing. But those areas, that review was not detailed enough for them to necessarily be able to notice landowners to enter into the sidewalk repair program. And if the public works staff is unable, due to their level of staffing, to be able to review areas adequately, then the city will fall out of compliance with the agreement. And we think that working with, since many of the defects in sidewalks will be the responsibility for individual landowners, if the city is able to go through the notice process, investigate areas that they can, with the city can, with less of a budget, impact on itself, while maintaining due process for individual landowners, that it can speed up the compliance and maintenance issues. The Public Works has improved some other systems that we found issues with when developers were building new projects. They weren't necessarily in compliance, and Public Works has streamlined its processes to be more involved, and we believe that will be helpful. In Parks and Recreation, we were very impressed when we were there previously with situation in the parks, that it's really a credit to the city at the level of compliance and level of accessibility at the parks, where the types of facilities and playing fields have at least more than 50% of each type of facility is served in an accessible route. And that one of the things Parks and Recreation is working on, which might come to the council, is that they are working to increase connectivity between the accessible components of a park. We believe that's very important. So, for example, you want to go to the playing field to see your son's baseball game, and you've parked there. Maybe you're traveling to the facility, to another facility there, and instead of having to go back to a car because there's not connectivity between the other components you're trying to get to in an accessible manner, that's not the experience that able-bodied people might have. The new Disability Awareness Accessibility Review Board, we hadn't had a chance to meet with them because they were, because that was newly formed, but we're hoping they will be as involved as the prior boards will be, and hope that the city will look to involve the public, continue to look to involve the public in that. We looked at various issues of effective communications and technology. We had a few suggestions for the city to make changes in its contracts on timing and such. The biggest issue we see in communications and technology, going back to IT and the websites, is, we did a kind of quick review of the website. We didn't look at every page, but we continue to see that information is presented in not optimal, or in some cases not accessible manner at all. The federal government has not produced a definitive standard for the manner in which content needs to be published on a website. We suggest and we expect that the new administration will likely be moving to something called WCAG, and that the city should work to move to those standards as quickly as possible. And one of the issues that the city has, and this is not uncommon, is that information is not only put online by people in IT who know how we know the technical aspects to achieve accessible documents online, but that other people, a given department might put up a notice, or the some information on the website before it has been scrubbed. And people need to, work with IT, and IT needs to reach out to train the producers of content, so that they're not playing a catch-up game. Can skip past employment and human relations, but broadly speaking, we see a fairly diverse and well-served employee situation in the city. Emergency management in since our previous review, made important changes and to make sure that its plans will deliver effective emergency management relief when there are situations that call for it. Of course, the city has had various events over the years, and we're glad to see that the city is doing better after those events, and then other exercises actually have given the emergency management team chances to test its preparedness to make sure that systems are working well for everyone there. Moving on to the police, we were impressed years ago that the city had been working to train all of its police officers on issues affecting disability. And, in the 10 years since we started working with the city now trains all of its police officers, which is a very positive change. And the city was a very early adopter of the use of something called a crisis intervention team of police officers who receive additional in-depth training on working with people who might be, for example, in mental crisis or have other issues that require a higher level of understanding and a different approach to work with people in that situation. And in addition, there are mental healthcare providers, mental health providers working with and working sometimes separately on mobile crisis teams that are being seen as throughout the country as a more effective, less dangerous, less fraught way of dealing with difficult situations. Less dangerous for the police and less dangerous for people in these situations. There's been a change in under the 2021 COVID relief bill known as the American Rescue Plan, which contains new federal funding to support an expansion of mental mobile crisis teams. And we would suggest the city look into that and work with the state and perhaps lobby the state, show its experience, its positive experience in this situation to deliver safer, more effective community engagement in these situations. That would be something that the state would have to apply to, so that's why you would work in that manner. I think I can move past several items that you'll see when you get through the report. And
Jim, if I could just interrupt.
Those were the items that I felt especially needed to be highlighted. I guess the last one is in voting, where the city needs to where the city needs to to make sure that it plans well in voting and is able to investigate each of the places where voting occurs, and so that voters have an accessible means there of voting, and the city should be sure to invest the resources that are required, although
Jim?
in the past things have been working well there.
Jim, we may be running out of time. I want to make sure the city council members have a chance to engage with us.
Yep, we have about 5 minutes
So
remaining.
I'm
So we're
wrapped
gonna
up
wrap.
and can take questions.
Great. Okay, thank you. Let's go to questions. We're going to go to Counselor Kiley first.
Actually, I don't have any questions. I'd just like to state, as you all know, that this is a topic that is very near and dear to me. I haven't kept it a secret that my oldest sister, Ruth, was born with spina bifida and passed away at the age of 18 due to complications from it, well before ADA guidelines were put into place. She would have greatly benefited from those. But Sioux Falls strives to be an all-inclusive community. However, I think one segment of our community that is often overlooked is our citizens with disabilities. So the more we can do to improve conditions and improve their ability to be active members of the community, the better off we all are, especially as we're addressing a workforce shortage issue. This has the potential of providing us with some relief in that particular area. We all know that transportation's always been challenging, the half mile outside of the fixed routes, especially in the southeast and southwest, when we don't offer fixed route services south of 26th Street, and we are down to 85th Street now. And so the paratransit, we know that they face challenges financially. It's a system that is basically is not sustainable by itself, but we do have to continue to look into aspects like our on-demand transit and hopefully make the improvements there. It was the River City that we did contract with to assist us with some of those agency trips. But just simple things like sidewalk cracks and removing snow. There's a reason behind these ordinances. Imagine yourself being in a wheelchair and you're trying to get to your bus stop. Even an inch of snow is going to be a huge challenge to make your way through. Or a sidewalk crack is a little as 3/4 of an inch. It's as insurmountable as trying to go up curb and gutter in a wheelchair. If you ever haven't tried it, wheel yourself a block in a wheelchair, and you'll see the challenges that has, that presents. But anyway, I do believe that we can do more than just the bare minimum when it comes to what we're required to do. I think we can go above and beyond in our desire to be a truly all-inclusive community. So thank you for your efforts, and I hope that we continue to move in that direction.
Thank you, Counselor Kiley. Counselor Brecky.
I've got a couple questions, but I also want to piggyback a little on what Counselor Kiley just said. I want to give a shout out to someone who really started the city down the path of doing more than the minimum years and years ago. And I will tell you, Charlotte, I'm so thrilled as you give this report to see that that's still the mindset in the city of Sioux Falls, that, you know, just don't necessarily do just the minimum, but is there another level we can take to it? Can we even make it better? And not wait necessarily till laws are passed or standards set, but let's just go ahead and get ahead of the curve knowing that that's going to happen. And the shout out goes to Lawila Hunking. Way back in the 1980s, before the ADA was even passed, and it was on the drawing board. I mean, it was kind of being discussed, bounced around at the federal level. And she was the street commissioner at the time, and that was under the 3-commission form of government, so that was a long time ago. But she had the city attorney's office draw up an ordinance that required that we meet the ADA requirements that were in draft form before the federal government even passed it. We were about 5 years in front of it. So all of those curb cuts, whenever there was a new construction project, the curb cuts, were done earlier. And then on any city projects, the ordinance was put in place on any city projects that we put in the ADA compliance requirements, again, before the proposed federal law was even passed. So the history has had a genuine, or the city has had a genuine history of getting out in front of it, of embracing it. And, I watched that happen, but then I also watched, after I left the city, I also watched the benefits of that. And one of the speakers said today, there is an economic benefit to it. And I will tell you that over the years, since that attitude and that kind of pre-compliance and took place, we became a mecca for handicapped. People have moved here in the thousands to this city over these 3 decades to raise their handicapped kids here, because we have been ahead of the curve on accessibility. And so it's brought much economic benefit to the city. I can give you an example. The Special Olympics Training Center. There is a reason why the Special Olympics Training Center picked Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It was a no-brainer because we had such accessibility. And so, there is economic benefit to it. It's more than just a caring attitude and doing the right thing, but also it has economic benefits. And I think, Councilor Kiley, you're exactly right. One of the most underutilized, workforce development pools that's just sitting out there is the special abilities, kids and young adults. I use them when I owned Honey Baked Ham. And for any of you that have had Honey Baked Hams for years, the Volunteers of America and kids from McCrossins would come in and do all of the glazing of the hams for the holidays. And then they got so good at what they did that I always had at least 1 or 2 special abilities kids working me permanent part-time throughout the year. And it's amazing how we limit them, but we tend to limit them, but their potential is limitless. And I will tell you, as employees, they love to work, they're dependable, they have a good attitude, and they may take a little longer in the training mode, but once they've got it, like in some of those repetitive skills and stuff, I mean, they're completely consistent and trustworthy and just excellent employees. So I'll just, give a little pitch for any employers out there. There's a lot of, I know a couple of the hospitals, I know Avira uses a lot of special abilities in there, with all those that can develop the kind of skill sets that can be very useful in a hospital setting. So that's, just my shout out. I also would like to just, a shout out to the police department. This was incredible news at a time when we hear all of the things that are so volatile and going on around the country. I mean, it's just worth repeating what you just said here about our police department being, again, ahead of the curve in dealing with mental health issues. I'm writing down what, was just said to us. I mean, there's better ways to diffuse situations, safer, more effective community engagement. And apparently we're we're already ahead of the curve, but it's being suggested to us now we get deeper and farther ahead of the curve. I can't imagine anybody not being supportive of that in this community. That's such a great idea to just become leaders in that kind of community policing. And so super excited to hear that, and just wanted to say it again because if people maybe lost that in the lengthy briefing, that's something to be really proud of and really excited about. And then one question I had on the IT stuff. As you were explaining that one was difficult for me to understand. It said that there's room for improvement there. Can you give me some examples of the kind of things we're talking about that we need to be doing? It was hard for me to kind of glean, what. Just I kind of need some concrete examples of what kinds of things allow us to have a more broad way of communicating with the population.
Jim, do you want to take that? Jim, you want to take that?
Sure, go ahead. I got it. So, sorry, I muted myself and thought I unmuted it, but I missed it. for example, you have a meeting and there's an agenda at the meeting or minutes produced of the meeting, and somebody makes a copy of it, sends it to the printer, scans it into a PDF, and that, and then you post that to the website. What then has happened is, that documents that you were able to edit and such on your computer could be produced in a way that would allow somebody who uses, something like links or a system that will be able to get the information in the document and read it out loud to them. But when you scanned it into, on a copier, it just became an image, and the system is no longer able to transmit the words that are in there unless you've taken other steps. So people need to kind of understand that there are ways to format documents that improve the accessibility of them so that people can use screen readers and other technology to be able to receive that information that you're putting out. And that's kind of quick rundown.
Okay, thank you. So in other words, kind of what you're saying is there's more than one way to communicate things, so we should be exploring various ways to communicate. So we just have to cast the net broader.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Could you clarify for me, when is a written report going to be available?
We finished up revisions last night, so as soon as IT can get it posted, we'll have it on the website and get it over to Tom to link to the minutes to this meeting. So I would expect within the next day or two.
Oh, great, okay. Yeah, if somebody could just notify us, whether it be Tom or you, that it's available so we can go read it, that would be great. I'm sure there's a lot of great information in there, so.
Will do.
Anything else? Seeing none, thanks for the presentation, and thanks to our presenters for the excellent information. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Pleasure.
Okay, that brings us to our second presentation, which is Comprehensive Housing Plan, presented by Director Jeff Eckhoff, Director of Planning and Development Services, and Matt Tobias, Development Services Manager.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you for your time. We'll get through this as quickly as we can. Today I just want to talk about our comprehensive housing plan, which kind of entails our traditional housing program, housing fund, and the things that we're looking at doing, and particularly address the neighborhood revitalization division that the mayor announced yesterday. So I was looking back at some stuff, and back in 1996 when I went to work for the Development Foundation with the Minnehaha County Group, one of the interview asked about what some of the major issues of the day were, and one of them at that time that I cited at that time was affordable housing. So this has been around for a long time, and it's a very multifaceted, very complicated, several layers issue, and there's no silver bullet, but we think we've got an approach that'll at least help and get us a ways down the road. Essentially, if you look at what is our overall goal, it's just leveraging resources of others. We want to create accessible housing, and we want to keep neighborhood or existing neighborhoods investable. And you'll hear me use that term a few times a day, investable, which really just means getting in a proactive way before the neighborhood falls in total disrepair and making those investments so that others will make investments as well, whether that's a commercial investment or whether that's somebody willing to go in there, buy a home, or rehab a home. There's essentially 5 parts we want to talk to you briefly about today. One is organizational, which is, again, that new division that the mayor stood up, talked about yesterday that we'll have active online by June 1st. The partners that we work with in housing, which are many and complicated, which is part of the conundrum for people trying to find housing. The programs that we have, which are somewhat limited, and some that we're going to revise, and the new one with the housing fund. And then lastly, some of the regulations and zoning, which really is just getting out of our own way, right? Working across the different departments, looking at design standards, zoning. We brought that amendment to you a while back regarding the driveways and the setbacks for the houses that were older with single car garages. It's that type of thing, and being diligent about making sure, again, we're not in our own way and causing hardships that aren't necessary. Organizationally, we're talking about, again, this neighborhood revitalization. It will be a division within our current department. Matt Tobias is going to head that up for us, and he'll be talking a little bit later about it in more detail, and I'll talk to you a bit more about his choice for that. Overall, I think I would summarize it, it's more proactive and reactive. It's really just getting all of our tools together in one toolbox and working in a more coordinated way. The mayor mentioned that. It's really not anything we're not doing. It's just let's be smarter about it, let's be more coordinated about it, more complementary with the other departments across the city and what we can do. We're bringing housing, we're bringing code compliance, neighborhood associations and the grants program, hoping to expand upon that, vacant home and rental registration. All those things that we do, we're bringing them into one division. Right now, they existed in a couple. One was in planning, some of it was in housing. We're bringing all that together. Al Rudder will be our lead housing guy with the federal programs, and then Matt will direct the rest of the division. This really started as a conversation about code compliance. That if you had a house with garbage on the front lawn, a car parked in the yard, and a broken window, that actually was 3 different inspectors, 3 different divisions, even with 2 of them within our own department, that had to go out and do that inspection. And at least at the initial stage, we feel like that could be one visit. We could cross-train people. We could take those pictures and get the code cases started and be a much more friendly customer service and also less confusing for the residents. Because we do have good compliance with the first notice, but when it gets confusing that way. So that's kind of how the discussion started, and then evolved into this whole holistic approach of how we build neighborhoods. And really, if we take housing and you look at and think of it as neighborhoods, that's really what we're trying to do, is build and strengthen neighborhoods across our city in the core and other places as well. We've got a ton of partners that we work with, and they're listed here. I won't go through them with you, but there's a lot of services, and you heard that very early on as we looked at our housing. It's just how do we work together with them. The housing clinic program that was stood up, we kind of started with looking at being almost another service provider, and we have since pivoted to being how can we help the existing service providers provide leadership, provide resources, coordination, that type of thing. So we've made that pivot. We had a meeting with Minnehaha County Human Services, and they were agreed that things changed and we needed to be flexible, and that was a good move and a good pivot for us. So for example, just trying to get all the service providers in the same software program. There's some limitations and restrictions and resources that maybe we can help out with to help get that so the service providers can talk to each other and client information can flow back and forth easier. Programs that we have our federal program with neighborhood revitalization, repair, rehab. We get about $1.5 million of federal funds a year. We put in $500,000 of city funds with that. About a third of that goes to repairs, homeless prevention, Bishop Dudley House, third-party case management through the Bright Futures program at ICAP. And then a third goes to rehab and partnerships, tax credits, our partnership with Habitat, with Southeast Council of Governments and the development and movement of those homes. And then about a third of it goes into new construction with affordable housing solutions. So that's kind of how that money gets divvied up. The housing clinic, we talked briefly about providing that connectivity between the partners and providing that leadership and resources that we have to bear to help with that, to be working in a more cohesive manner. And we're looking at our discretionary formula for the affordable housing. And we're taking it from the core, we're looking at expanding to the entire city. The formula is somewhat in progress, but the amount of relief would be about the same, but we're looking at moving it to the front end when the cash flows are most critical in those first 2 years of operation. This would be for commercial housing, which is defined as 4 units or more. The housing fund, again, we've talked a little bit about this. It's leveraging public and private investment and the flexibility to react to strategic opportunities to partner or acquire land or rehab or renovation, whatever that neighborhood needs. General guidelines, we're starting with the 80% AMI, first-time home buyer, workforce housing guidelines at 80 to 110% or 120% of AMI. But we want the flexibility to look at it on a case-by-case basis based on the applicant, based on the project. It's a workforce housing project. We're tying employment to it. At least one adult needs to be employed in the area. We are working through the policies for this fund. We've had about 3 meetings with it, with our Accessible Housing Advisory Board that Commissioner Selberg sits on. We're getting closer on a design on that and policies all the time. As we move forward, any development agreements that would come up would go through the normal process and come through the council for approval on consent calendar, and it could be obviously pulled off to visit about. There's three parts to the housing fund, and we're trying to plan for whatever opportunities come up. And we don't have a quota on one part or the other, but we are looking at different opportunities that might happen. So one is home ownership, single family, twin home. We actually met with some developers that build more towards that end of the market. We modeled some of this off of some of our federal programs. But what we'd be looking at, one possibility is a deferred loan to the developer that then gets transferred to the homeowner. It's a deferred second position loan. So what happens is they don't have to make payments on it when they sell the house, and the appreciation is there. That's when they repay the loan to us. We do that with our federal programs, and it's been pretty successful. It's a model we think that works. It's a model that the developers we talked to liked and thought it would help them because it gets them some cash up front to help with some of the initial infrastructure costs. And we'd be doing that. We wouldn't be doing it for 1 or 2 units. We'd be doing it for 10, 20 units within a development. But it is obviously expensive because you're doing single-family homes. But homeownership is such an important part of, I think, the overall housing strategy that we wanted to make sure we allowed for that. Multifamily, this is very much a model after what the legislature was looking to do with the housing fund appropriation this year that went all over the place and ended up not working out. It is a zero or low interest subordinated loan to the developer. We target fair market rents, which are under $100. So roughly in 2020, a fair market rent for 1 bedroom was $685 and a 2-bedroom was $839. So we help get those rents down. We're not looking necessarily at tax credit units. We have federal funds that we can put into that, so that's not really a target for the housing fund. And we're trying to give a priority to some of the smaller units. Again, 4 units and more constitute multifamily, and then we would put affordability restrictions on it for the length and the term of the loan. It was interesting in that discussion. I think the legislature, a couple things. One, it was Sioux Falls, Rapid City. There was a concern over all the money going to the big cities, but they also had some match requirements on the dollars that we had to have the same characteristic as them. It really would have hampered us in the long run. So they're doing a summer study on the housing issue. So I think sometime in June is their first meeting. So I know our chamber is involved with that and hope we'll have a voice at the table to talk about that. The last part we want to talk about is what we call the strategic investments, and that is that kind of ability to be timely, be flexible, be nimble when we see an opportunity. Maybe it's a chance to get a hold of some properties that are maybe gone to the tax rolls, or we can get a hold of that are detrimental to the neighborhood, and we can remove or repair those. Opportunity to maybe build up density, and Matt will talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Anything that meets a long-term purpose that improves that neighborhood. So it could be we buy it, we hold it, we buy it together with a developer, we buy it separately, but we hold it for development because we want to be able to control that before something happens that would get in the way of becoming an accessible housing space. It could be public space. It could be a mixed use if that's what's right for that neighborhood. We just want to have those options open. Obviously, we're targeting housing, but we're also, again, investing in the neighborhood, making it investable so others will spend money to live there and put their businesses there. So as we had this discussion, we talked about staying this division up and how this would look, and we started looking around, and as many of you have heard many times from Matt Tobias, but he's got a unique experience. He's worked at Public Works. He was a code enforcement manager for a while. He's been the planning manager for the last 2 years. And he's been the interim housing manager since our housing manager resigned for the last month, and has done a tremendous job and just really dug in. And so he gets the honor. We're very pleased to welcome to our team and ask him to take this role on. As you know, Matt's got great passion. So he's going to talk to you about regulations and zoning, and then kind of take any questions, and we'll take questions that you may have.
Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Council. Afternoon. So yeah, as Jeff said, this is kind of in my wheelhouse a little bit. Planning and Development Service Manager for the last couple of years. I'll be kind of still dabbling in planning. Code Enforcement Manager for about 5 years before that. About 9 years in Public Works. So yeah, so I get to go a little bit of a rap sheet there. and just kind of say that this is something that we'll take a look at. It'll encompass a lot of different departments, and it's a better coordination between all the departments. So one of the things we do want to look at, we want to look at just kind of reviewing ordinances. Jeff kind of hinted on that a little bit. We had case after case, Board of Adjustment cases were coming through, and it was dealing with the driveway width, and it all tied into housing. So those things are coming more and more and more, where we're seeing housing just kind of playing a role in everything that we do in planning. So I guess my goal going forward is, I've told housing staff that I want them to have a seat at the table through all these different organizations, through Public Works, through Parks. I want them all kind of coordinated together. So we do want to look at density. Density is a big thing. We want to look at especially density along, like, we're doing a Minnesota Avenue corridor study right now with the reconstruction of Minnesota Avenue. We feel that we could look at some cases like that. We can't say the entire city is just going to all of a sudden be all this dense area, but where areas make sense, let's look at that, and let's see if there's opportunities there to create more density, and maybe even incorporate some housing along those arterial streets, and maybe even some commercial. So we'll be looking at a lot of different avenues where investable, as Jeff said, that investable term in neighborhoods. So the way I look at this thing is the code has to be in check first. Okay, we have to have code in check first. Then comes our neighborhood services department, our neighborhood development department, and then we intersect housing in that too. So the whole division is referred to as neighborhood revitalization, but really it encompasses those three: the code enforcement, the housing, and the neighborhood development. So it brings all those three together. Like Jeff said, and even the mayor mentioned yesterday, we're really not adding any new positions to this. It's combining all the different things that we're doing into one house. We're going to continue to coordinate very closely with health. We'll hopefully be working a little closer with health, maybe even looking at bringing some of their people over to our team someday. I mean, that could be a stretch, but we're going to look at just different ways that we can make our division not only more efficient for internal, but the other thing, you guys, no secret to me when I'm sitting up here, but it's external. How can we make our division more efficient for our customers? Okay, so we kind of hit that a little bit about multiple inspectors going to one spot. So we're going to try to look at ways that we can be more efficient internally, and only in turn and help our quality of service that we provide to our citizens. So with that, quick rundown. Any questions?
Let's go to Councilor Selberg, and then we'll go to Brecky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just so I'm clear on this part, and I think I've got it, but so there won't be a new housing manager. That's what you'll be doing under neighborhood revitalization manager.
Correct.
And there won't be a new planning services manager taking your spot in that spot?
That's something that's, Jeff can probably attest to that. We're still working out.
Okay, because my concern a little bit is, I mean, I know how busy and what you had to do in that before, so how stretched are you and what are we doing in that regard?
There's some pieces to work out yet on the long term, but for now, Matt and I'll be sharing on the planning, and we kind of do that now with the planning staff, planning and zoning staff, as far as helping guide that. But we really want Matt's attention focused on this revitalization and housing, primarily.
And he'll be able to do that right away now, even while he's got the other.
We're in this transition for this next month, but yes, we're confident that changes we're looking at down the road will be able to handle that load.
Councilor Brecky.
I've got several questions. First, as you discuss the neighborhood revitalization piece, one of the topics of discussion that always comes up, when you talk about, coordinating code compliance and all of that, is landlords. Did you give some considerable discussion to how you treat landlords? Do you help them revitalize their property, or should that be their job? Should they be treated different? Or should they be treated like anybody else who's got a property with deferred maintenance issues? Have you given any discussion to that and how you're going to deal with that? Because I think it's key when you talk about cross-training and multiple code violations and trying to get that all under one hat. Because oftentimes, like even when you look at the effects of Project Nice, you go through and you get it all cleaned up, and some of the worst ones are some of the landlords, and they might be living in Florida, and they're just kind of sucking the property. So has that been part of the discussion and how you're going to deal with that?
I'll say it's always been part of the discussion, and it's always going to be one of our biggest challenges. What we're doing, this is where this makes sense a little bit. We have programs within our housing team that we could be utilizing and pushing to these landlords. Okay, we have very low interest rate loans for rehab, for rental rehab program. It's not a program that's really taken off. We really can't get it to take off quite yet. So we'll be incorporating some of those ideas in with our code enforcement team when they're out to actually, dare I say, like having to deal with those landlords and their condition of their properties. So there's opportunities there that existed before, but now when we bring those together, I hope that this is going to help.
You know, for what it's worth, you know, my 2 cents on that would be, it's kind of always a mix. You've kind of got to do the enforcement thing, but if there's a carrot that you
Yeah.
can hold out there, you know, to work, you know, to help them too, then you're more likely to get them to come along with you.
And there's ways that we're looking at, we're always looking at ways where we can try to incentivize this and make it a little easier because yes, we have large sticks in our toolbox. And do we have to use those? Not all the time. We don't have to. So,
Right.
yep.
You're not done yet. I've got
Oh, okay, that's
several
fine.
more. I'm kind of excited about this. The other question that I had was, I guess I don't have that many questions. Oh, in the past, there's been some discussion when we were, you know, really learning and being trained on the city's philosophy with regard to TIFs, and there was talk about neighborhood TIFs. Again, has there been discussion about doing a pilot project, you know, and creating a neighborhood TIF, which might be utilized in a way to help as part of this whole revitalization effort?
I know we've had those discussions. So first of all, we can't use TIF funds to build the housing. So that's one of the issues. We can do, well, I guess you can do affordable housing TIF. Probably the biggest issue with the TIF is getting enough scale to create enough increment. But it certainly is something we could look at. We've had those discussions. It's just, we actually had a discussion with a developer earlier this year who's putting in a development. And if we were trying to negotiate a certain number of affordable houses and we do the TIF. What happened there was he was so far down the road with his plans, the due diligence we had to do, he didn't want to wait for us to get the due diligence in place to do that. So that was an attempt we made. We had a couple discussions with him and we just couldn't get the logistics to work out. But certainly it's something we could continue to look at. What we would need is, and this was an ideal opportunity because it was a new development. And so there was a lot of activity planned. What we were trying to figure out is over the next so many years, what would your increment look like? How many units would you bring on per year so we could gauge what kind of debt that the TIF could service? And that became the challenge because it wasn't one single project. It was how is this going to build out over the next few years? So to do it in a small space would be hard, but if you had an open opportunity where you had several units or you were going to you know, go into a larger area, then that would be something we certainly would look at.
Well, and I think another one, you know, as you talk about, again, taking that comprehensive approach, which I think is very wise and very timely, and I think it's a really great idea, but I think also taking a look at tax rebates in such a way where you're actually, you know, helping out that individual fix their own problems, and it's not all just, you know, all just the government stepping in, but, you know, a shared relationship, you know, with the individual property owners and, you know, helping them in that way. So I think that could be part of your comprehensive look and comprehensive piece.
One of the things that we have these programs available where we can, the small loans or small grants that we can help them with, the furnace goes out or the roof needs repair or that type of thing. It's just hard to get that word out, right? And sometimes we don't get that message or that media out. So what we're hoping is we have an inspector talking to somebody at a house, looking at it, and all of a sudden they notice something, that not only can we, instead of just giving them the citation, we can say, hey, we have some programs that can help you. And let us come in here and let's work with you to get your house back into compliance and fix what it is that's wrong. So that's kind of that comprehensive part. I think sometimes government, we have a lot of tools, we have a lot of programs, and we're not very good sometimes at how we let, one, publicizing them, and two, helping people understand how they can use them.
I agree. And then one final question on the land use, on the zoning issues. Again, glad to see that you're incorporating that into the discussion, because I know one of the things that, you know, I heard from Chuck Moran when he came in and talked about revitalizing downtowns, and I thought it was so interesting and it made creative sense to me. about how they're relaxing zoning standards, again, like you're talking about for density, but also combination uses or mixed uses, like allowing a person to rehab an old house and have the first floor be retail and the second floor be living. And they, opening up small shops within a neighborhood, like the small little candy store again, or some small little tea and spice store, something like that, allow the person to live and work in the same environment. But then it's got that eyes on the street effect, that creating of the old neighborhood, the old ice cream shop kind of thing. I think that kind of creative thinking could be injected into this programming, and where it comes into play is in, again, those zoning standards, and perhaps relaxing some of those, or just being creative with the zoning standards that you're looking at changing. So I'd kind of make that suggestion as something that you consider, because I could see in some of these neighborhoods like All Saints and Pettigrew and Hayes that there could be a real opportunity for something like that, and I think that would be very clever and very exciting.
And we have had some neighborhoods we've looked at that, and some of that is having that right zoning for that. Some of it is creating some additional density that helps drive enough customer base, because it'd be great to create these walkable neighborhoods in the older part of town and the more established parts of town. But there's a density part that goes with that as well. But yes, we have looked at that. Is part of our discussion. We've actually had some thoughts on a couple of neighborhoods that might work for that. So
when you think of these people who have, boutiques that they drive around, and park at events, they sell jewelry at craft shows. What if they could sell those out of their house, and use that to help, create a revenue for them, and have a presence in the neighborhood. So I think just a lot of potential there. Well, great, thanks for the presentation. Very exciting stuff.
One more thing I'll add really quick. Just one more thing, Counselor. We are looking at the opportunity of looking at, especially in the Pettigrew Heights neighborhood, exploring the ideas of a TIF for commercial and multifamily. So that's something we're looking at. We're trying to figure out ways that we can do that. So just wanted to add that really quick.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that's great that you're even looking at it. I'm very excited. Thank you.
Counselor Jensen.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think Mr. Tobias and Counselor Brecky are going to become best friends here over the next couple of years. It's just great to, hear that you guys are working on that revitalization and so on. And thanks for bringing a lot of the ideas forward that we've talked about here over the last couple of weeks. I think in general, when you're using a housing plan such as this, it's an all hands on deck type of atmosphere, and that's what we're going to have to continue to do as we move forward with this housing plan, because I think that there's some other things that we can accomplish through this, and I think we should have some working sessions here over the next, over the summer, kind of like the Housing Task Force for the state of South Dakota, because there's going to be a lot of correlation with the funds that they may have and we may be beneficial users of. So in my opinion, I'd like to continue to work on this and invite the council to be a part of your planning process, because, I know a majority of us have went out and talked to people like Ray's or Realtor Association, with Todd and the Home Builders Association. We're going to be having a round table here, probably with about 15 different people from the city, some counselors, Counselor Sale, Counselor Erickson, and myself. CCOG is going to be there, and then the chair of the task force for housing over the summer is going to be there. And we're going to, talk about what is going on and what the impacts of new lumber packages are, what the impacts of demand for workforce. And, this is a great start to a comprehensive plan, but it's such a deep-rooted issue that it's been around since, probably before the 90s, in the 60s. So, those are some early comments on this, and I plan to see this through as we're going to need it as our population continues to grow at 5,000 people per clip. I know that in your partners page, you listed a lot of different people, and I know you didn't just shout out the HBA, but I know you've talked to the HBA. Ray's We should have Logan involved in this big time. The city council, like we discussed already, and then the state of South Dakota. I mean, if we have all those people involved and we actually work together, and we're going to be able to do some big things. Maybe one of the questions I had is, you know, for the housing fund, when we talk about the different opportunities that we can invest in, you're going to bring those agreements to the city council. So where is that money? Where does that money come from? Is that going to come from? Where does that come from,
That's
Director?
to be determined. So,
Okay.
Right now, there's no funding in it. I do know that Fort Sioux Falls has pledged some money towards that effort. I think it's $500,000, $100,000 a year over 5 years. We have had discussions about that internally. Where would we take it from? Is there a general fund appropriation? What would it be? And we have not come up with anything. We did not want to add fees, an additional fee to building for that, so we've stayed away from that. So we're still looking. Obviously, if we could get appropriation from the state, that would be great seed money to get us going. But at this point, it's still a work in progress, and that's one of the pieces we have to put together too. You are so right on that this. Every time you uncover a layer, there's 10 more, because it's a deep, complicated, complex, lots of moving pieces, and it changes. So a year ago, this single family thing was, but now with the price of materials, that's probably not as attractive as now really paying attention to the existing neighborhoods, because of cost of materials have just changed everything in just the last few months even. So you always have to stay current, you always have to be open to input, you always have to continue to talk to your stakeholders, and you have to be willing to pivot, because it does change very quickly sometimes.
Yep. And then just final to wrap up my thoughts on it. Depending on availability, we're going to reach out to the public and invite them to Hy-Vee on the 20th of this month and then the 27th of this month to talk about this issue. You know, we're going to have the round table, but we're going to invite the same people to the Hy-Vees to get out and talk about what's going on for revitalization, to zoning issues, to what's going on in housing for individuals. So if they have anything that they want to communicate to us, they can come to the meetings here, but we're also going to go to the streets and start talking to those people. So Councilor Erickson and I have started that, and we invite anyone and everyone to be involved in that. So thank you, Director, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I just want to go through a couple different slides. One, thank you for I know there's been some changes with the organizational of that, and so I think it's important to know what the right hand's doing and the left hand's doing when we have all these different groups kind of crossing over different departments. So I think that makes sense. It will be good to see that coming forward. With that, I'd kind of just like to reach around and talk a little bit about the housing fund and when that comes forward, making sure, I know there's no funding in that right now, but I think it's important to make sure this council is brought alongside and not just presented saying, hey, we've solved this and we want you to appropriate $5 million. I think it's important for us to be creating this policy while you administer it. We're the policymaking board, and we're the ones that decide where the money comes from. So it's really important for us to do that. As we've talked to the folks on the housing board for this summer, we've tried to talk about some of the opportunities for matches and ways that we can make this go further. This isn't a Sioux Falls problem. This is a regional issue. Housing has always been a challenge and will continue to be a challenge, whether it's too much housing, too less challenge, too expensive, too cheap. So really, there's a lot of folks that pull their heads off their pillows in T, Hartford, Harrisburg, even Madison, and drive to Sioux Falls to work. We benefit from them spending their money on sales tax and gas, but we also need to be mindful that housing is truly a regional issue. And so I'm excited about the housing study to try to come up with some of those things. One of the things that really came about today that I've unfortunately not had a chance to talk to all of council, but one of the things that I'd like for us as a council to really consider, we got rid of our task force, our committees. We didn't get rid of them, but we stopped meeting. We haven't even met in the last year. And so one of the things I'd like us to consider and really propose is merging that public service and land use and creating a committee called ROC, which would really be Regulatory Oversight Committee. Oftentimes things come in front of us and we don't know what that stands for. We don't know, okay, if we're talking about the FEMA maps, what is that going to do to a home sale in that floodplain? What is that going to do if we change the freeboard from 2 foot to 3 foot? What are the problems? Do we need to do that? And so I really feel like it's such a big deal that we need people to get out of the way. And so if we as a council on that policymaking board can be that conduit and say, hey, you know what? I just built a house 7 years ago. I didn't finish my basement because I spent our whole entire budget on the main floor. We had to do some really silly things, in my opinion, from a regulatory standpoint, that I had to spend $4,000 and $5,000 and $6,000 and $7,000 on my basement that I wasn't going to build out for another 4+ years. And that just meant that I didn't get to invest that money upstairs where I was truly spending that money. So as we've talked about this, I know Councilor Sale and Jensen and I have been in a bazillion different meetings and talking about this. There's so much low-hanging fruit. Now, federal government says you have to do this, and the state says you have to do this, but we're far more restrictive as a city than those. I do not want to mess with any of the life safety issues. I think that's really important. Market's going to dictate the price of a house, but I really think there's some really silly things that we can get away from. Some of the developers that we've talked about have switched more into doing private developments, so they're not city-owned streets. They have to manage them, maintain them, but guess what? Their driveways are smaller. They don't have to do sidewalks. It's more of that community feel. They have a playground, maybe a workout area, and it's truly a community. If you look at some of the larger cities such as Las Vegas, and I'm not saying we need to do the same thing as Las Vegas, but they have that higher density. They have the ability to create these kind of little communities with their own cities, and that's something that we really need to be looking at doing with, as we move forward. The sidewalks are a thing, are different. You can talk to 4 or 5 different developers that do those kind of communal housing projects, and I think that's another area that we could increase the density of housing, that you know what you're buying when you go into that. So I'm excited, like Councilor Jensen said, I'm excited about the opportunity for us to host this roundtable in collaboration with Raise, and really diving into all the folks that have ideas and things, because this is not a one-size-fits-all. This is a great start, but all things need to be on the table, because we've got to be innovative as we talk about housing. Housing looks like different to each and every one of us even sitting here. So I'm excited about the plan taking off, and I hope to be in contact more about the possibility of this committee and truly each and every one of us making some changes and having the TIF on the table for housing. And there's just so much we need to be having on the table and do. So thank you.
Thank you. And we look forward to the roundtable. The policies on the housing fund, we've been working on those for about 3 months, and we welcome any of you to join us at those monthly meetings with Councilor Selberg and the rest of the committee. It's a publicly noticed meeting already, so we will send that invitation out to all of you. And if you want to crash the party, I guess you're welcome to.
I'd love to crash the party.
But you do have a council representative on that, and there's county representation. We have members from across the community that are involved with affordable housing, accessible housing, and so it's a pretty diverse committee. I can't remember how many people, Marshall, about 8 or 9 people on that, I think. There's an architect, there's a couple realtors, there's Joan Franklin is on there. So it's a good cross group of people, so I think you would enjoy the conversation. So we will make sure to add you to that list. Like I said, it is a noticed meeting.
Yep. Thank you.
Councilor Brecky.
I'm glad that you brought up the committee structure, because when we stopped meeting regularly, it's because we really didn't have anything to meet about, but we didn't dismantle it. And the reason, that, council member, you didn't dismantle it is because we said there are times when we should assign something to it and then activate it. And so, I mean, and that was the intent when we stopped that. And I see at least 2 things, in today's discussion that need that. And I've always felt that it would be great if, when we activate the committees, people could, on the council, just say, hey, I want to be on that. I want to work that, and either do an ad hoc committee or activate the ones that already exist. For example, Councilmember Neitzer started out the discussion today with, hey, I've been working on the marijuana issue. Well, I know there are other council members who are interested, highly interested in that issue as well, and their constituents have been talking to a lot of them about that. Well, wouldn't it be nice if, okay, that we activated whatever committee that was or had an ad hoc committee, and those council members who are really charged up about that issue, you know, could dive into that. And I think the more we do that, the more we can give better guidance, you know, to the administration, and we can vet things a little better. And those meetings can be public, you know, or, you know, some of them, if they, most of those, there's probably no reason why they couldn't be public discussions, but it would just allows more public input, more people to be involved in the discussion at the base level.
Other questions, comments? Councilor Starr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things, I want to take it a little bit of a different direction. I appreciate this director for being here today. We're going to see it again tonight. We've seen it almost every meeting where there's a lot of concern in the community about multifamily housing and where it's going to be placed and who it's going to be close to. And in fact, I started on the council getting an email from another elected official talking about, hey, we moved out to this area of town to get away from those people. Or to, you know, that multifamily housing brings crime, it brings minorities, it brings people to the neighborhood that we're not looking for. We've seen it in a lot of infill situations across the city, whether it's in our neighborhood. And you know, you're gonna see a number of those that continue to happen. My email's full of them, and it continues to pop. How do we get a more positive message out about what's going on in the density? We keep talking about density, but at the same time, I think our residents in one way are telling us they don't want that density.
Yeah, they also don't want higher taxes.
I'm with you, but you know, I mean, at some point when we continue to hear the same message from group to group, I know many of us from this dais have chastised some of those folks that have come here and said it's those people who are moving into our neighborhood. In fact, the one email, the lady said, well, those people in that housing, their dogs are going to poop on my front lawn. What are you going to do about it? I don't want those people in my neighborhood. And it's a lot of those people. So how do we turn that? Because if we don't get the density, you're exactly right. Taxes are going to have to go up. You know, we're not going to be able to attract the type of businesses to the community. We're not going to be able to, none of us are going to be able to afford to live in those locations. And I don't think it's a PSA, but at the same time, in a lot of the cases that we're seeing, it's obvious to us that have been part of the system, hey, this is what's coming next. You know, you built on the corner of 2 arterial streets. You know, I mean, this fits our comprehensive plan. And I think as a council, we've continued to approve those. We've drug our feet on a few of them, but the cry is getting louder and louder. And I think there's less understanding amongst the community of what we're trying to do from both the planning, but to what we have to do housing wise. So
It's really sad, isn't it? I mean, it's sad that we feel we have to vilify people because it doesn't fit our picture of what we think it should be. It's sad that we cast a whole bunch of people who choose or can't or aren't able to own a home because of the prices. It's sad that we cast people as criminals because they live in an apartment and they're probably paying twice what your mortgage payment is. They're employed. They contribute. Somehow that's bad. It's sad. It's absolutely sad. And I don't have an answer. We are coming through one of the most contentious times I've ever lived through. People feel like it's fair game. You're not like me, you're bad. You don't think like me, you're wrong. You don't look like me, you don't belong here. I've got kids that are a product of this Asian hate thing going on. Where does it end? I applaud you for standing up. I applaud you for doing the right thing in these zoning, and then you'll hear some more tonight. I lived in an apartment. I lived in a trailer house when I was in college. Am I bad? Are your kids bad? Do your kids live in apartments? So what the hell is going on? I want to know. It is just sad.
I think, Director, one of the things that we have to continue to do is to continue that education process. And I know we feel like we bang our heads against the wall, or I feel many nights that I'm banging my head against the wall, but it's an education process. And I think that's the solution to it, whether it's in our schools, whether it's in what they do. And it's unfortunate because a lot of times these issues come up because it hasn't affected my neighborhood before now. And some of it's fear of change, fear of different cultures, and just the different things that go on, and the crazy things that I've heard over the 5 years that I've been here. But you're right. I think it's something that we have to hold our heads high and continue to do in the right way. But I guess the overall point is that we can't ignore it either.
No,
And so,
it's real. It's very real.
yeah.
You know, it is that as we grow out, I mean, and I get it. People bought land and they bought this rural development. They thought they'd live in the country and have this wonderful view forever, you know, and the community continues to grow towards them, you know, and we try to do it and you know, and you'll see tonight there are down zones that are being opposed because there's apartments as a part of it. We see it as a down zone. I get it. They don't see it that way. I certainly understand where they're coming from, but it's a strange thing, and I think probably the velocity of apartments that are coming online right now probably stuns some people. There's a lot of them, but that is kind of a choice too for some of the people in the younger generation that are coming out of college, don't want the maintenance love, you know, living that. So that's just as complicated as the overall housing thing, and it's a tough piece to unravel, but it is an ugly part of not our community but the entire country right now. It's just kind of where people are, and it's coming out of a pandemic. It's coming out of a really, really divisive election cycle. It's coming out of a lot of partisan rhetoric that is not helpful, and it's just social media. There's all these things that come together to create this perfect storm that's just not real particularly nice right now.
Thank you.
All right, we need to move on to public input. Thank you for the presentation. I'd love to get on my soapbox and talk about the same subject, but I'll save it for another day. Anyone who would like to speak on anything we talked about for up to 5 minutes, we would welcome you to come forward.
I guess I have a question about some of the housing stuff.
Welcome.
Because I've seen some pricing
Can-
on some.
Could we just have you just state your name and then
My name is Sarah Koob. You guys have seen me before. I
Thank
don't venture too often because I'm ill, but I came down for 2 reasons. One is I'm concerned about the housing market. I'm watching townhouses, 2 bedrooms, 2 bath, going for $425,000. I grew up in Sioux Falls. I've never had a job that could afford that. Okay? And I know there's other people out there. And I'm particularly concerned because in 2008, we had a lot of people lose their homes to players like the banks, playing with realtors and construction companies. Okay? And now I'm hearing the same entities are going to be around making law, and I'm like, are we going to talk about how some corporations are buying up huge amounts of property? It's not even individuals, it's corporations. And are they being held accountable for capital gains tax to make sure that they're not buying more property than they can own? You know, just things to protect the people who made Sioux Falls one of the top places to go in the nation. Okay? It's the people. They could go anywhere to get big government, any major city. But they're coming here to Sioux Falls because there's a unique group of people here. But if those people don't control the landscape, are you going to maintain those values? And I don't think you will. Okay? The main reason I'm down here is because I tried to apply for a medicinal marijuana card in April. I have my $200, and they're telling me I can't apply because there isn't any infrastructure. Okay? And I'm sitting here going, I'm tired of depending on my federal government and my state government to get their ducks in a row. Okay? I understand there's some legality issues going on, but I don't think we're questioning if medicinal marijuana is coming to South Dakota. I think it is coming with 70% voter turnout for it. So I'm asking you to please appoint a Minnehaha County manager. Start getting what kind of operating system you're going to have to keep track of your inventory, to keep track of contracts for businesses that wish to participate. figuring out what your tax set brackets are going to be and how many of these dispensaries you're going to allow. And I, as somebody who has had some health issues that have been calmed by cannabis, I can't get the most potent form of it, the RSO, without having to go to a different state. And it makes me a
Ma'am,
felon here.
This should be just limited to things that are on the agenda.
Okay, well,
that was-
I heard this brought up, so
But
I'm
we,
sitting.
and we do have public input as well at the next meeting, at the end
Okay,
of the next meeting. so-
well, I'm just asking if you guys could please do what voters of South Dakota have asked you to do. And that's to organize and get the bare bones together, so at least I can put in an application. So that when I'm traveling, trying to get my medicine, that I'm not getting fleeced for thousands of dollars. And a criminal record to boot. And it's happening to a lot of people. So if you guys could please address this. It needs to be addressed. And I don't want you guys to sidetrack it and let it die in committee. I want you guys to address it, please. So, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Others who would like to speak tonight? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.